Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Jamaican Association of Greensboro panel discussion on domestic violence. My name is Carol McGlashan. I'm the president of the Jamaican Association here in Greensboro, North Carolina. And panelists here today, we have Tiffany Grant. She is a financial coach and advisor and the host of the Money Talk with Tiff podcast, where she has spread her knowledge on financial wellness. Tiffany has a bachelor in business administration with a concentration in management, master's of business administration, MBA, accredited financial counselor. Oh. Don't worry about it. Do you want me to read on? She is Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt, okay, and years of experience helping people improve their finances and building long-term wealth.
Yeah, Tiffany cut mine short, because I noticed mine was all that I submitted, but that's okay. Yeah.
Next we have Judge Caroline Pemberton, and she is also fellow Jamaicans, both of them are. She serves as District Court Judge in the 18th Judicial District of Guilford County after being elected to the bench in 2020. Prior to becoming judge, she was an assistant district attorney with the Guilford County District Attorney's Office for 14 years, during which she prosecuted an extensive amount of domestic violence cases. She's also a licensed registered nurse. Judge Pemberton migrated from Jamaica in 1981 and lived in Brooklyn, New York until she relocated to Greensboro, North Carolina in 1991. She earned her law degree from North Carolina Central University School of Law in 2006. And next to her we have Sondra Phelps. She is a sexual assault outreach specialist, and she obtained both her bachelor's and master's degrees from Ashford University. Her natural drive for helping others paired with her passion for ending sexual violence led her to working in victim services. Phelps joined the Family Services of the Piedmont as the Sexual Assault Outreach Specialist in July 2020, and has been advocating and supporting statewide initiative to end sexual violence ever since. In her spare time, Phelps enjoyed spending time with her offspring and cats. How many cats do you have?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that. Inside, I have 11, and then there's a colony of 5 that live outside as well.
Did you say that?
Yes. Okay. I collect strays of all types.
Okay, before we start, you want to give us a fun fact about this?
Vivian, can I say something for 1 second? I also want you guys to acknowledge my sorority Zeta Phi Beta, and 2 of my soror sisters are here. Soror sister Cynthia Stout and soror Miss Donna Powell, who's also from Jamaica, if I'm not mistaken.
Fun facts. Honestly, I love guns. And so I used to. But I used to train for competition shooting.
No, to come to it, mine comes.
I won't call you late. Yeah, I put on events where I help people get their concealed carry too. So.
I need to talk to you.
Oh, so that's what you told me now.
Me? I don't think I have any fun facts right now. I used to have, I really did. I had a lot of fun facts, but right now my fun facts is just coming home from work and going to my bed. That's it. After you sit on a bench for hours and listen to a million stories, and I like watching comedy stuff to get rid of that stress. And on the weekends, I like to volunteer. That's it. I don't have any more fun facts. I'm by myself. Well, when I have my grandbaby, yeah, because my grandbaby lives in Raleigh. And as a matter of fact, I'm gonna have him this evening when they bring him for 24 hours. So yeah, that would be my fun fact. It's not an everyday thing, it's when I get to see him, which is my joy, actually, yeah.
My fun fact was I have a whole herd of
But it's not that bad. I used to work with a lady who had a 3-bedroom house, and she only stays in one room. The other 2 rooms were set up for cats. I mean, I did like 25 of them. Yeah, so you're not there yet.
Too many litter boxes.
Our 4th panelist is running late, and he is the Sheriff Danny Rogers with the Guilford County Sheriff's Office. I will introduce him when he gets here. Okay, we are ready to take your questions.
And I think there's a live feed now, since because of the rain. Is there a live feed? Yeah.
So it's going live on the Jamaican Association page and then Money Talk with Tim. So if you want to go and share with your audience, people that couldn't make it, feel free. Also, really quick, the bathroom, if anybody's interested, because I'm like, we didn't make this announcement yet, but it's straight down and to the right. You'll find the bathroom. And please help yourselves to the food, because it's a lot.
So one of the questions I have I don't know who's gonna take this one, is how do I help a friend who might be experiencing domestic violence?
Generally, when your friend is experiencing sexual violence, sorry, that's my usual day job. Domestic violence, one of the best things you can do is just be supportive. Often we have folks who come in that have friends in situations and they're like, how do I get them out? Well, for those of us that work with folks who experience domestic violence regularly, they have to be ready to get out. It's extremely dangerous for them to leave, as Judge Pemberton can definitely tell you. And so being supportive and being willing to listen and offer what resources you may know that are available, and then just kind of stopping at that instead of offering suggestions and maybe your opinion, because folks who experience domestic violence are already extremely isolated. And once you start pushing them towards a direction, you can isolate them further because you're no longer a safe space for them. And then also, one of the things I always recommend is don't trash talk their harm doer. Even if they're coming to you saying, you know, they did X, Y, and Z, they're a garbage human, you do that thing that you do with coworkers when they're complaining about other coworkers. You smile, you nod, you acknowledge that you hear it, but you do not commiserate with them. Because again, it creates this silo of isolation for them because it reduces that one more person they had to talk to, and you may be the only person they had to talk to and vent. So when your friend is experiencing domestic violence, just try to be supportive and available for when they are ready to leave. And know that they may leave multiple times. I think the average is 7 or 8 times before they're actually able to stay gone permanently, and there's tons of reasons for that.
And I would just add on from experience, the person has to be ready to leave at the end of the day. Like she was saying, you know, if you talk to someone and then you like start bad talking the person, from experience, I know a lot of people started like distancing themselves away from me because I wouldn't leave the situation. You get what I'm saying? So then it just became more and more of an isolation, like she was saying. So I know from experience, that's definitely fact. So just offer resources and, you know, support. I think that's the main thing that people need to hear.
From a judicial standpoint, you really need to know the level of progression that abuser is capable of. Because I have experienced people who try to assist that have been harmed. They have been killed, maimed, you know, so if it's a person who is very aggressive, who you know is capable of killing, you would like to encourage them to involve law enforcement, go to the Family Justice Center, but try not to do it on your own because you could be the next victim. Because I had one case where I issued a restraining order and she was gonna go live with mom and he went and killed mom.
Wow.
And this happened recently. So you also need to know what type of resources you need to offer and what kind of help you can give without hurting yourself also, so, yeah.
Question, do you specialize in getting to the root of domestic violence? Like, what I mean by that, for me, experience, it started when I was 5, because my dad started beating me. So then I grew into the pattern of the beating was a form of love. So do you go all the way down to the root of dealing with the individual as to why they feel or that that's okay?
I would let Ms. Phelps answer that because the Family Justice Center is like a little community in a building.
Yes.
And so, yeah, and then I will piggyback on what she said.
We do have a program called the Domestic Violence Intervention Program, and what it does is it helps people who have, you know, either a 50B against them, or maybe they have got, protective order. I guess not everybody knows really what we call them. But if they have that, or if they have like a domestic violence charge, if something happened and the cops came and they were, you know, charged with, you know, assault on a female or strangulation. I think there's more words to it. I'm not a legal expert by any means, so I don't know the terms. But they can go to the Domestic Violence Intervention Program and they learn new skills and ways of communicating and identifying better ways of interacting, because that's, you know, instead of throwing people away, let's teach them new ways of behaving so that maybe they don't go down that same path. And so our DDIP program is aimed at helping folks learn better coping skills and better communication skills and better expectations for a healthy relationship. Because like you were saying, we often only have the example we lived. Right. And so we don't know that maybe that's not appropriate. That's not how everybody else lives. And so that's a place for those folks to kind of learn new behaviors.
And just to piggyback off of that, just from my experience, and Judge, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I just had to go to court last month for a violation of a protection order that I have, and I had suggested the DVIP program, and they shut it down because they said it should have been ordered in the original order. So yeah, that was smart. Sorry, whatever. But I say that to say, if you are going through the protection order process, ask for that at the beginning. Because if I would have known, I didn't even know about the program until the violation happened. And then the DA was like, oh, there's this program you can ask for. And I was like, well, nobody told me about that, like at the original hearing. So maybe fight for that. Like if there's, if I'm not mistaken, it's like drug assistance.
And there's a box you can mark on the protection order where you request that they go to that.
See, and I had no idea. So look out for that because I think it's a good resource. Okay.
Now, to answer your question about the root of why somebody would tolerate domestic abuse or exhibit domestic abuse from childhood experience, it's true, it's cultural. It's very cultural. And most of the women now that we're seeing are cultural individuals from different countries who are now realizing that this is not okay. Right. You know, because they're supposed to be submissive, subservient, and if they do not do what they're supposed to do, then they experience abuse. And in that culture, it's normal. Right. It's not looked upon, and then they come to America and they realize, no, this is not, you know, this is an issue. And so for women who have experienced that, being mom, And vice versa, because men are victims of domestic violence.
Right.
And a lot of people do not want to accept that. They can be victims. I've had 2 men this week in my courtroom asking for a protective order. So, huh?
Because I experienced it so much, and then the older I got, I was like, oh no, let me give it back to you, what you're giving to me. So I understand how men can be a victim as well.
And you know, abusers are manipulative. They are very charismatic. The flowers, the candy, and then they blame you.
Right.
And so you develop what they call battered woman syndrome. It's my fault. I didn't cook the food right. I didn't prepare his meal on time. The house wasn't clean when he came home. I should have done better. And so then they'll abuse you, and then they'll tell you it's because I love you, and I want you to do right. And they bring in chocolate, they bring flowers. So after a while, you start to attribute abuse with love.
Yeah.
Because if he didn't love me, he wouldn't care what I did.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't be doing this. And if I showed him how much I love him, he wouldn't be doing this. So yes, your upbringing has a lot to do with it. Because the abuser saw his dad abuse his mom.
Right.
The victim saw her mom accepting abuse and decided that, well, it didn't hurt mom, so it wouldn't hurt me. You know, so yes, and so you have to realize, you have to come to that realization that it's not normal. And the Family Justice Center and other resources, we have a lot in the Guilford County area, so you just need to know your resources. But if you don't know where to start for yourself or for your friend, that's where you need to go, is the Family Justice Center. Because they have detectives, they have advocates, they have child victim advocates too, forensic people that will talk to the kids if there's sexual abuse. So if you don't know what else to tell them, just tell them the initial FJC. as in FJC, Family Justice Center. Yeah.
I have a question. Do you think any of the acceptance of abuse stems from self-esteem problems too? Lack of self-esteem?
Yes, definitely, because part of that is you get beat down and you assume you deserve it. You deserve to be treated less than anyone else, or less than the person who's, abusing you as well. So yeah, self-esteem does definitely play into it a lot. And one of the other caveats of domestic violence is often folks who are experiencing it are also experiencing sexual violence within that. And that adds an entire extra layer of garbage that they have to deal with because they don't know that it is wrong. Like, I don't know how to word that properly, but we are all brought up to believe that sex in a relationship is an obligation we have to fulfill. And so when you're forced into it repeatedly, on top of the other types of abuse you may be suffering, emotional and financial and physical, it breaks down every single barrier you have to protect yourself. They have now crossed every single boundary you could ever set up for yourself. And it just creates that nasty, vicious cycle of your self-esteem is constantly being beaten down to the point where you do believe you deserve it.
Now, self-esteem issues may not have been there initially when you got into the relationship. But over a period of time, when the abuse starts, and a lot of people attribute abuse with just physical abuse or verbal abuse, but you have financial abuse. And financial abuse and self-esteem can also go hand in hand, because when that person controls the purse strings, you can't get a job, you can't go to school and get an education, you're living on like you get what you call from your parents, an allowance, and so when you don't have anything, then your self-esteem drops because you're dependent on this person. And so when the person constantly verbally abuse you and tell you you're no good, nobody's going to want you, you are not good enough for anybody else, you will have no education, who's going to pick you up, you don't have a job, so of course self-esteem comes into play, and the worse it gets, the more dependent you become. And I will give you an example. I had a case when I was a prosecutor. The gentleman was from Mexico, and he was a very heavy drinker. And every time, he was the sweetest person, but when he gets drunk, he would beat her. And so this one time, the neighbor called the police, and the police came, and he was arrested, and of course he didn't have his papers, so he had an immigration hold on him, which means he can't get out. And so she came to court the day that it was supposed to be prosecuted and wanted to drop the charges. And we said no. Well, I said no. And well, I was cursed out, and she started crying. She had 3 little babies with her, but the only thing she kept saying is, he's the only one in the family that has a job. If he goes back to Mexico, what am I gonna do? This man, he beat her up so bad, her eyes were swollen, you know, but all she could think of was, I can't do any better because I don't have a job and he takes care of me. That's a self-esteem issue, because she would rather be abused than get out of it. And so you see that all the time.
And just piggybacking on the financial part, again, from my experience, I'm a financial coach. And I was like, I never have money. I'm like, where's all my money? And so that was part of the financial abuse that I was experiencing. It's like, and then he would say, oh, money talkative doesn't make any money, or, you know, this, that, the other, blah, 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 and just degrade everything that I would possibly do. And so for pretty much the whole time we was together, I stayed in a relationship because the other side of that is I was the one with the good credit. So everything's in my name. So I'm like, okay, if I leave this relationship, I'm gonna be stuck with all of this debt, everything, because his name wasn't on anything. So I was like, okay, I need to stay so we can try to pay some of this stuff down. But then towards the end, because it just kept getting worse and worse, I said, you know what, it's not even worth it. I said, if my credit score tanks, at the end of the day, I help people go through this so I can build it back up, but my safety and security is more important. So just from a financial coach perspective, like, this is what I do every day, all day, and I still fell into the trap of financial abuse. So that's how, like, common and such a manipulative tool that abusers usually use. Because all throughout the relationship, it was like, I thought you cared about your credit. I thought, holding the credit stuff above my head. It's just a manipulative situation, and financial abuse is usually one of the main things.
I don't tell this to a lot of people, how I ended up in North Carolina. I lived in North Carolina in 1991. I left New York 12:01 a.m. after January 1st, because that's the time my ex was at his job. And I left New York with my 2 sons, a house filled with furniture, with 2 bags, and my microwave and my vacuum cleaner. And people said, well, why a microwave with a vacuum cleaner? Well, I like eating a clean surrounding. I do a microwave when my kids want something to eat, because I was going to a stranger's house. But I was getting away from a marriage that was getting ready to turn physical abusive. It was always emotional. It was always, nobody's gonna pick you up with 2 kids. Nobody wants you. I went to nursing school, and it was like, it was the biggest problem when I started going to school. And when I said I'm gonna leave once I'm finished with nursing school, I'm gonna kill you and kill the kids and kill myself, because I'd rather die than let you and my kids leave. And of course I try to protect my children. But the last straw was, I woke up one night and he was standing in my house. He wasn't supposed to be there, and I left. Rented my own place with my mom, but he found a way to get a key to get in from the landlord. And he was standing over me with a gun in his hand, and he said, I could kill you now and nobody would know. And that's when I knew I had to get out. And so I told my mom, I'm leaving. Nobody knew I was leaving. I knew he worked after he got up in the Marines. He was at the post office. He did the night shift. And at 12:01 a.m., January 1st, I got into a car with a friend with my 2 kids and 2 bags and my vacuum cleaner, microwave, and I headed north, because that's where my friend lived, and that's the only place. So I basically came to North Carolina with nothing. Nothing. Stayed with a friend for over a year. But I had just graduated nursing school, so I had a career. Right. So once a nurse, you can't starve. And that's what I wanted, was my nursing degree. And that's where the fight was, because once I got that, independence would have followed. So everything was done to prevent me from getting. I started nursing school in 1984, a 2-year degree. I didn't finish it till 1989 because of the constant interruption and tactics to let me quit.
But you
So,
finished.
but you have to have, like she said, you have to be ready to get out.
Yeah.
And what happens if I'm undocumented and I report to law enforcement or file for a restraining order? Will I be deported?
As an undocumented person living in the United States, you will not be deported because your immigration status is of no concern for the judicial system when you're filing that complaint. It may be of concern for the abuser because they want to know if he's a citizen so they can deport him. Because if you're convicted and you have a conviction or charge of a serious crime, you can be deported. But as an undocumented alien in this country, and I don't know if they still have it because it's been a while since I've left the VA's office, but there's a visa that victims can apply for when they have become victims of abuse. And if they cooperate with the law enforcement in getting that abuser convicted, is it called a K-9 visa? I don't,
U visa.
U
Yes.
visa, a U visa, right. The flip side is, you have women and you have victims who are not victims, real victims of abuse, but they want their green card, and they will do that to get it. Because what happens is if they got married and the person promised to file for them, and then things go sour, and they said, well, I'm not going to file for you anymore, you know, this is where it stopped, then you'll find out they'll say, well, I was abused 2 years ago by this person, or you've been beating on me. Some are legitimate and some are not. And as a prosecutor, I had to determine which one was not. And you can tell the ones who are not, because when they come in, their main concern is, am I gonna still get my green card? You know, you're trying to interview them about the abuse, like, tell us what happened. Does this mean I'm gonna get my green card? You know, all right. So when was the first incident of abuse? Well, if I tell you this and I cooperate, am I gonna get my green card? So you realize, well, wait a second here, you know, you're more concerned with the green card than you are with telling us the evidence that we need to prosecute this person, what's going on, you know. Well, yes, you don't have to.
And there's a group of, I believe they're lawyers, that will help with that. It's called the Battered Immigrant Project, and that's local to here, and they will help with the U visa, and then there's also a T visa for folks who've been human trafficked. And so those, I don't know the ins and the outs, that's why I let, I'm like, please, thank you. But yeah, so there are a couple different versions. And then I also like to remind people that it doesn't make it an overnight process. I have a client who is almost 30 and was sexually assaulted at 15 at a bus stop, got a U visa, and is just now finalizing her process. And so she also did have to go back before the immigration court and cannot have anyone present with her while she re-explains the sexual violence she experienced, because immigration court is a little different than the regular courts. Normally we get to accompany people so they have a support system while they're telling this really hard story, but in her case she has to go in on her own in front of the immigration judge. So just kind of, it's a great program, I love that we have it, but it's also not an overnight process and it's not guaranteed.
The only good thing is you get to stay here while the process is ongoing. They do not send you back and then bring you back if it's approved.
This question is, what is domestic violence and how is it different from intimate partner violence?
I don't think there's a difference.
There's a slight one.
Huh?
Very slight one. Domestic violence can be any violence within the home. So it could be mother to daughter or parent to grandchild, etc. Intimate partner is usually reserved for between dating relationships, spouses, that intimate detail.
Oh, that's what they meant, intimate, okay. Yeah, because one thing that same-sex is now considered domestic violence. It used to be, the language in the statute says of opposite sex. On March 11, 2022, the Supreme Court of North Carolina has ruled that people in same-sex relationship can be defined as being in a domestic violence. So they used to be turned away because there was no law protecting them, because the law at the time says of the opposite sex. So when they went to fill out the forms or get protection, they couldn't. They had to do a 50C.
Yes.
Yeah, which is, you don't have to have any kind of relationship, you know, to get a 50C.
To add to that question, are you?
No, go ahead.
Can your spouse rape you, and how do you prove the law enforcement or the courts that you were raped by your spouse? Because, like I said, they think it's an obligation. Your wife, you belong to me, I can do what I want, but I am a firm believer that no is no. Irrespective of who you are, no means no. So how do you prove that this person raped me?
Well, you would have to prove rape the same way you prove every other rape. That you said no, because it's still hard to prove that somebody was raped unless they're a total stranger, if you say your brother or your sister. The problem with having a spouse is, was the relationship contentious to begin with? Was there issues going on? Now, I'm not going into the law to give advice because I can't give legal advice. So that would be from the state standpoint, the prosecutorial standpoint, like, this is what we need for you to show. So you would have to show that there was some, in my opinion, if someone come in front of me and said I was raped by my spouse, well, were you still living together? Were you sleeping in the same bed? Were you still being intimate up until this point? And what happened that day? Why you consider yourself being raped? Well, I told him no, he held me down, he forced himself. Well, if you look at the language of rape, it's an unwanted touch. It's being forced to have sex against your will. So it is rape, but proving it is going to be up to the jury and the trier of facts and the evidence that you bring. So it's hard for me to say you can only prove it this way, because you have to look at the totality of the circumstances and say, this is what was going on, this is an abusive relationship, he was very dominant in the relationship, she had no choice in anything, including sex. But to say, how do I prove it? I can't tell you how to prove your situation. It's a case-by-case issue. It's just based on what the relationship was, is, what led up to it, and what happened. What the forensic evaluation showed. Was there brutality? Was there force? You know, was there signs of force? And is it just you saying he raped me because you didn't want to have sex and he forced himself on you? Like he did 20 other times when you were in love, but today it's rape. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. All right, you come to the bathroom and you say, no, I'm not having sex today. And he said, yes, you are, and throw you on the bed and you had sex. But it was, at that time, it was something you accepted because you were not in an argument at that time. But today we have an argument, you came out of the bedroom and you said, I'm not having sex today. He threw you on the bed again and he had sex, but this time you were in an argument. So this time it was a no that should have meant no. So I can't really give you a clear definition of how you can prove that. It will depend on the facts and circumstances. But you got anything to add to that?
It's 100% what you said, because honestly, when I work with people whose primary complaint is sexual violence in one form or another, and unfortunately, even with the best laid out investigations and everything you could possibly think that you would need to have a solid case, we're all people, and you're gonna go in front of a jury, and the jury doesn't know the details like maybe you do, or I do, or some of you, if they don't understand how trauma works, or how fear works. And so you're gonna go in front of that jury and they're not gonna realize that you may have been completely terrified for your life, so you just laid there and took it, and it's not gonna go anywhere. And so sometimes when I work with folks who experience sexual violence, we talk about what they're looking to get out of this. If you're looking for justice, or you're looking for closure, it may not always be in your best interest to pursue that legal route, because it is such a hard thing to prove. I've been in many, many, many cases where we've had, because that's, again, what I do for a living, you have recordings of the person admitting to what happened, and the jury's like, well, but, I mean, did he know he was being recorded? What did you do? And so nothing happens. And so that victim just went through the entire process of having that forensic exam done where they're swabbed in intimate places, and having several very difficult conversations with nurses, law enforcement, the district attorney, and having to write a written impact statement, and then they have to go in front and their entire lives are torn apart. And then there's nothing. It's just nothing. And so managing your expectations is always a great thing for folks. And so kind of giving them the rundown of like, this is what it could look like. I'm not trying to discourage you. I just want you to have your eyes fully open and be aware of what could happen before you go through, you know, here's all your options, here's what they all look like.
Now, let me add to that. Not intimate like your husband, but in the last 2 months, I have heard 4 cases involving young girls who have met men, either in the community or online, and they decided to sleep in the same bed together, but with a verbal agreement that there will be no touching. Okay?
Really?
That's what a jury would say. Really? See exactly what she's talking about. And so I remember one of them, she just met the guy 7 days before. They agreed to lay in the same bed, sleep in the same room that night, with a verbal agreement that you will not touch me. Well, sometime they're curled up together. Sometime that night, his hand went wandering. And now she is before the court seeking a restraining order for sexual abuse.
How is that sexual abuse though?
That's what a jury would say. But in her mind it is, because the verbal agreement is you wouldn't touch me. And that touch was
already
that's how hard it is to prove intimacy with a husband. Because you're married to this person. And you're not even married to this guy.
Right.
But I want a restraining order against this person because once I go to the police to file charges, he's going to hurt me. But what happened? You went, I can't be judgmental and say, well, I'm a judge, I could be, but I don't want to say, why? But I did give them a little pep talk. You don't know this person. You just met him 7 days ago, and you were in his bed with an agreement, a verbal agreement, he wouldn't touch you. And then he touched you in places you did not want to be touched, and now it's sexual abuse. Because sexual abuse is not only penetration with body part, with the lower part of the body, it's with the fingers too, digital penetration. So that, when I first got that, when I thought, okay, isolated incident. No, a week, 2 days later, another young lady came in, but this is somebody she worked with for about a month. And now she's here seeking a restraining order because she agreed to go to his house and lay with him, and he started to touch her. And now that's sexual abuse. So that's why it's so hard when you put yourself in certain situations for a jury to find any kind of empathy or sympathy for you, because you see the first thing you said when I said that? Imagine you being on that jury and say, well, how is this sexual abuse when she voluntarily went in his bed and who spooned with a guy that is going to touch her, and not expect that he's going to want to do something. Plus, you just met this guy 7 days ago in the other situation. And then about a month later, a third one came in front of me with the same thing. So I started to ask my friends, I said, is this a new trend among millennials? Because who does this?
So would it made a difference if it was written?
It wouldn't have made no difference. It's a situation that you put yourself in.
Yeah.
When he's sleeping, how can, if he's sleeping and his hands wide
And the woman is curled up next to him.
Tell him you cannot move your hands in your damn sleep. Another thing we have coming up, or at least I've seen, I'm not sure if you have, but with our college students around here is this new role play thing called consent, non-consent. So they're basically role playing rape scenarios, but not having a safe word. So you're engaging in this behavior, you're like, I'm gonna say no, you keep going, you ignore it. but you don't have a safe word. So when you really do want to stop because you don't like what's going on, maybe they're being too rough or they're, choking you, I don't know what you're, I don't want to know. Anyway, they don't have that word. So the other person doesn't stop. And then they come to the police and they're like, well, he raped me. Well, you get the whole story and it's like, but did you agree to engage in rape type behavior without it? So it's really hard to tell one person, well, you did this horrible thing, it's a felony, you're gonna go to prison for the next 15 years.
And be labeled and registered as a sex offender.
When they don't know that what they were doing was non-consensual based on like the setup. Or they were sleeping and their hand wandered, So it's kind of, again, it's that managing expectations too.
I'm gonna say this is the last one on that topic, okay? Because and this was not a young lady. This was an adult that was married with her husband. And I don't know if it was a joint partnership to lure these men and then set them up. Because after I did the first case, which I refused to prosecute, and I realized there were other like behavior. So in this case, there was an ad on Craigslist. She put on Craigslist to meet men, not for intercourse, but for other sexual pleasure. Okay? And so, you have to remember that? And so they went into a hotel, rented a room, and the agreement was no intercourse, sexual intercourse, no digital penetration or anything, just oral gratification, okay? Well, he got carried away. Yeah, and started using his fingers. She called the police. Believe it or not, she is a married woman in a hotel room with a total stranger she met on Craigslist, and he decided to go one step above what the agreement was, and she was adamant she wanted him prosecuted for raping her. And I could not get it in her head that there's no way a judge or a jury is going to believe you when you put an ad on Craigslist to meet a man at a hotel to have sexual gratification through other means than intercourse, but then he got carried away with his digits, and now you want him to go away for a long time, and he labeled a sex offender. And your husband is upset that I wouldn't prosecute the case. He's not upset at her, which makes me believe that they were in this together. So yeah, you have to look at the circumstances and how you got yourself into that situation, and is it reasonable for a reasonable person? That's a standard for proving a criminal case. Beyond a reasonable doubt, would a reasonable person act like this under the circumstances? And that's what the jury looks at.
And just,
I was gonna say, I kind of forgot it now, but, when you were talking about, because you were talking about consent, and in California, I think it's the radical consent, that a friend that works in consent education, and it's assuming no until you hear a yes, and even that can be negotiable, that can be very foggy or ambiguous. But I was just wondering if there's any, if there is any efforts being made like that in the state of North Carolina where we're assuming a no until you hear a yes. And just looking at society, a lot of times people assume yes to be in your space, even if it's not physical or intimate. Like when you're pregnant, people assume that they can come and touch your belly, and you have not consented to that. That's your energy, that's your body. But is there any talks about like flipping the consent dynamic to you assume no until you hear a yes? Is there any work being done in this area?
I haven't heard of any. If there is, it hasn't been put out there yet, and I'm not saying it's not. I just, we just have to go with what we have now.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's a lot to do with the circumstances. It's the totality of the circumstances, and it gets to be a very fine line when a person have a relationship all along until that 1 minute when they say, well, I told you no. And I tell people when they come to my court, look, this is more than just taking new pictures, okay? It does recordings, and if you find yourself in a situation and you have your phone, turn it on. Because sometimes this is what helps you. Yeah, and that's what I tell people, we now live in the 21st century. Women back in the day didn't have this. It was your word against mine. And so you have this device that is, what do you call this, glued to people's hip and palms. Use it for the right reason, you know, right? So, but it's really, sexual cases are really hard cases. And the victims are very, very afraid to come forward because they know they're going to be victimized. And that's why it breaks my heart when I see people come in the courtroom and take advantage of restraining orders and stuff for reasons other than domestic violence. It's to get someone out the apartment they no longer want in the apartment. And it's to get custody of the children because they don't want the partner who they chose to have these children with, whose behavior has been the same for the 20 years they've been together before the kids were born, but all of a sudden that same behavior makes them a predator or a danger to the child, just because you're mad with him. And I see that all the time, because as soon as they get on in front of me is, I don't want him to see my child. Well, what has he done to the child? You know, sometimes partners don't get along well together, but they'll be the best parent there is, but you just can't get along with that other person. Does that mean he or she should not have access to their child? You know, and it's hard because you never know when that person's gonna flip that switch and probably kill all of them.
Well, that's what that.
You know, it's a hard decision.
Yeah, because I was privy to meet a lady who had the perfect marriage. And after 12 years, her husband came home and stabbed her to pieces where she
didn't see it coming. She didn't see it coming.
And so, like when you said, if they have that behavior continuously, that's one thing, but when they don't have that behavior because they've been able to hide it so well, or they have an affair and don't have the guts to go get a divorce because there's so much financial stuff involved, and then you try to kill your spouse, like, or, you know, how does that happen? How is that looked at? Because it took 2 years for her to get justice. Even after him admitting it on the stand that he had stabbed her 12 times and it was life-threatening and was walking to go get a drill to finish her off from the neighbor. So had she not been so covered in blood, she would not have been able to slide her hands out of the handcuffs because he handcuffed her to the stove. He would not have been able to slide, she wouldn't have been able to slide her hands out of the handcuffs to save her life by crawling out of the front door for the neighbors to see her covered in blood and stabbed almost to death. One of the other things I was going to ask, just out of curiosity, when you said that the couple who were putting the Craigslist ad on the ad on Craigslist, you said you felt like they were kind of setting people up. Did you notice a pattern in the type?
There were 2 other incidents.
Like, was there a pattern of the men that they were targeting? Like, were they targeting?
Yeah, men, professionals that has money. And when the attorney for this defendant brought evidence to show that this is a third person she had accused of similar behavior, then you started to see it was a pattern.
Was she prosecuted for kind of, misusing or abusing the court system?
I didn't charge her for that. I just refused to prosecute the case and had to hear the husband tell me what I was and wasn't. Yeah. He wasn't mad. I don't think he wasn't mad at her for being found in a hotel room with a man she met on Craigslist, but he was mad at me for not prosecuting the case. Yeah.
So to go back to the sexual thing, being married and all that stuff, I know in my situation, I didn't do criminal charges, but for the purposes of my protection order, like Judge was saying, my lawyer did the lead up, like, okay, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. And because of the lead up, that was a way that I was able, one of the reasons I was able to get the protection order. So just to give people hope, it is the lead up, and then also using your phones, I had a video too. And when the judge saw the video, he was like, well, no means no, and stop means stop. Even though he tried to come up with a whole scenario trying to say that we were in the BDSM community, and this is, all of that stuff. The judge was like, no means no, stop means stop, and you can clearly hear me saying that in the video.
Right.
So that's what helped my case too. So I just say document, document, document whenever you can. Now, his lawyer was trying to say, well, and why did you start recording instead of calling 911? And I was like, well, to record, it was like a swipe and a tap, you know, and it was easy to do. So that's the other part of it, and that's why the criminal part didn't go through, but I was able to get the protection order for that.
Yeah. So with, to your point, the recording is easier, but also when you're dealing with people who have narcissistic personalities, they have a hell of a great way of hiding things and making it look like it's normal, especially in front of other people. And recording is the best way to show what their, what their true natural form is, because they hide it so well. It's very difficult for a person who's being the victim or being abused by the narc to demonstrate like what's really going on unless you have that recording, that documentation. That's the best defense against a narcissistic personality disorder.
And I was gonna say, just to add on to that, that's also what helped in the court as well, because I had text messages with them cursing me out, calling me all types of names, things like that. Even the judge that was sitting at the time, he was like, "But you're a completely different person here in front of me. Like this is a completely different person." All the time. And he was like, "This doesn't sound like you do here today in court." But having all of that documentation, documentation helped my case, because they exhibited a different behavior to everybody else to make it seem like I was the crazy one. But then I had the documentation to back up every single thing I was saying. And so, yeah.
Well, I have had, when you get a 50B, an emergency 50B or a 50C, for an emergency there is imminent, immediate, serious harm to you that the judge has to decide. Is it imminent danger that if you don't get this paper today of protection, the person's gonna come and harm you? Irreparable harm, kill you, maim you, whatever. And so a lot of times, many times I have to explain that to the person, that maybe he shoved you last week, and you're here a week later, but is there imminent danger to you? Has he been calling you, texting you, threatening you, since that time? It's a may, it's not a shall. The judge may give you a temporary restraining order if the judge decides there's imminent danger. Sometimes people don't know the difference between the two types of restraining order. There's the imminent danger one, because everybody has a due process right to sit in a courtroom and face their accuser. And when you're doing temporary orders like custody and ex parte restraining orders, you're taking away that due process right, because they're not present. That's why it's called ex parte. It's one party without one party, because there is danger to this person. And so when you explain to the person what the basis is, they get angry, and that's okay. But then some cases, if they have standing, you let them get a 10-day hearing where they come back and you will get them. I said, I can't give it ex parte because I don't think you're in imminent danger, but I will let you come back and get a hearing where both parties will be here and tell each other the story. But let me tell you something. When they come back, and I've given ex parte where the woman comes in or the man and said she hit me, she punched me, she has ripped my clothes up, she burned my stuff, then when the parties come back and the other party has a recording, the aggressor was the person who came in asking for the restraining order. Okay? And I'm like, and I mean, when they came in front of me for the ex parte, it was the tears, it was he tried to hurt me, he tried to run me over with a car. Okay, I can't let this happen, I have to give her some protection. Okay, party comes in. Husband say, well, did she tell you she was shooting at me while I was trying to run her over in the car? No, she didn't tell me that part, Or when I smacked her, did she tell you that was because I was trying to leave and she kept ripping my clothes off, preventing me to stay, or I pushed her away from me? No, she only said we pushed her. Right, so that's my thing, is that you want that protective order, and it's in there for a reason, and I'm glad it's there to protect women, children, and men. See, one guy here, we have men who are victims of abuse. So you have to make sure that, and when you sit there making that judgment call, I go home at night, or should I have given that one? should I have, should I have given her a restraining order, but based on what she told me and I'm following the basis for it, it didn't meet the standard. You don't believe I don't go home at night thinking that I made the right decision, or when they tell me something that I really don't think is true, imminent danger, but when there's a child involved, I said, you know what, it's best if I just give this right now. So I'm just saying, with you'll have two types. Then when you do come back for the 10-day hearing, the judge decides if it extended for a year or if it gets dismissed, because once the other party comes and starts to give you the other side of the story, and you realize, wait a second, you were the aggressor, you were the victim, and then you dismiss it. But keep in mind that if you do get a restraining order, that's good for a year, and it can be renewed for up to 2 years. But you gotta file for renewal before it expires. So if it expires the 15th of May, you should have filed for it by today, okay? Because 15 would have been a Sunday, right? So you gotta file for it before it expires. So you get another 2 years. And you don't have to prove new facts. So if you get a restraining order that was for a year because he tried to kill you for some reason, you want it renewed for 2 years, the statute says you do not have to prove that something new happened. You can still come back to court on the same facts that you got the first one. But you gotta send notice too. I believe you have to send notice. I don't think you have to send notice that you want it, but I like to see that the person got a chance to come back. Because sometimes it's really for a vindictive purpose. The divorce might not have been finalized for the first year. So if I get it for 2 more years, he can't take money on the account, he can't do anything, he can't take the kids from me. So it's not always black and white when they come in front of you. And her job, I'm telling you, it's hard. So, because for everything, there's always those who take disadvantage of the situation, or advantage, I should say, of the situation.
And even if we know what they're doing as an advocate,
They have to,
we have to help them.
Yeah.
It's not an option. We will know, like, hey, you're in here and you're in here just for child custody, but I can't legally say, no, I'm not gonna help you because I know what you're doing is wrong.
Right.
And so then it's like, we're always like, oh gosh, please don't be mad at me, Judge, I'm sorry.
When I first took the bench, I thought that. I was like, do the people at the Justice Center don't screen these people? I didn't know, because I was a prosecutor. So we get to when they walk them over.
Right.
But for 50 Bs, and no judge like that courtroom, it's just because it's so mentally draining. You have to decide who is legitimate and who is not. And I would get people coming, and it's so obvious is to get them out of the apartment. Because the first thing is, will he be able to come back to the apartment? Both of our names are on the lease and I don't want him back. Well, what has he done? And I was like, the people at the Family Justice Center screamed. I used to say that last year when I first went, and it was so frustrating. But then I realized they have to have, because they don't know. Right. And that's what they're there for. And some of these people know the law better than them, better than I do. Right. They know the buzzwords: kill, suicide. They know the buzzwords, and they'll put it in there. And so when they come back for the hearing in front of me, I let them talk. Sometimes I know the other people in the courtroom are like, why is she letting them talk for so long? But if you let people talk for a while, they'll rip themselves up. So I just said, I'm not gonna like this. 1 hour. Yep. And then they start talking, and I know this is being live, and I really don't want to say this, but I had a case where the young lady came in and said he got a 50B temporary, he kicked my door in, he broke in my apartment, he called me 16 times in one day, he forever calling me, and some of the allegations, another judge gave me a temporary restraining order, so they came back in front of me for the hearing. What she didn't tell the judge was, he broke into her apartment, but they had sex twice after he broke into the apartment. But when you found out he's dating someone else and an argument started, you called the police and said he broke into my apartment, but didn't tell the police what happened after he broke into your apartment. And the 16 calls in one day, because you had the child during the time when he was supposed to have the child. And you took the child out of the state and didn't tell him. So here he's calling and you're not answering the phone. So where is my child? Is everything okay? He sent the police, when he finally figured out where you were, he sent the police to have a welfare check. You're mad. Well, you didn't tell that to the judge that the 16 calls was because you had the child. First of all, you took the child out of the state, and the child custody said you have to let the other parent know before you can take the child out of the state. And you had no permission to do that. So that's why the 16 called. But imagine you're sitting there as a judge and someone coming crying and said, he kicked my door in. 2 months ago, he threatened to kill me, and he's been calling me 16 times since then. What are you going to do? You're going to give you a temporary restraining order until the other party comes in and testifies and said, well, did she tell you that after that we had sex and had showered together and all of that? Or she had my child and what I was supposed to have my visitation that week and she left the state with my child and didn't tell me no. So, you know, they hold back. They use the buzzwords to get that piece of paper. Because right then and there, they can't have that child for the 10 days until the next. And then they'll come and ask for a continuance to get an attorney, so it's continued again, and that person can't see the child until the case comes back again. So not everybody is a victim, is what I'm saying. And it makes it bad for the true victims of domestic violence to be taken seriously.
Better justice.
Huh?
Because they know the system.
I didn't hear you.
It seems like sometimes they get better justice.
Oh,
because
they
know
do.
the system.
They do, yeah. Yes.
So I was gonna talk about, so I work with the elderly senior population, and I know that's another little rising number in every aspect of the word. So I know I call the family justice center a lot, like my agency does. I guess everyone can kind of answer this from your perspective of that. What is the best way to really guide, you know, the seniors that, you know, a lot of times seniors are looking for that love, affection, and attention that they may not be getting, but they'll stay in a situation that it could be their daughter, it could be a significant other, they could be dating someone that's young, so many perspectives, but how do you help those seniors in a situation when they're faced with intimate or domestic violence in that aspect?
Well, I'll just say from a financial perspective, because I've seen quite a few, you know, elders get financially abused, because sometimes it's so easy for people to take advantage of them financially, unfortunately. And with one situation in particular, I'll never forget, the lady, she was a millionaire, right? And the husband was the one that was financially abusing her. So every time they would come in for a meeting, he would try to take over the conversation. He's like, oh, well, he would call and say, oh, I need money, you know, this and the other. And I'm like, well, you're not power of attorney, you know, that's our client, you're not our client, you know, that type of thing. So I was able to, you know, prevent a little bit, but then what he would do is just manipulate her into getting the power of attorney and all of that stuff. Now, with that situation, what we decided to do was like we called the local DSS for their area, and we were like, can you do like a well check? You know, because it was also, it seemed like there was like physical abuse as well. So, and usually, you know, it escalates, you know, it might start with financial, it might start with emotional, and then it'll escalate from there. So that was one of the things that we did. We just called and said, hey, can you do a well check and make sure that everything's okay? And even like when I would talk to her, I'm like, you know, is everything okay? You know, that type of thing, just to make sure that she was. But with the financial abuse aspect of it, like I know another lady where I told her, because she was like, her cousins were taking advantage of her mom. And I was like, I would have a conversation with my mom and say, hey, did you know that the cousin is now listed on your checks? Or did you know that, you know, that type of thing, just to build awareness. Because sometimes older people don't understand how things work on the financial side of things. So sometimes just having a conversation like, hey, did you know this? Or are you aware of this? Did you okay this? Did you approve this? And sometimes, like in that situation, the mother was like, oh, I didn't even know, you know, that was the case, and then they were able to rectify it. But I think just opening up the conversation sometimes helps. And if you're outside looking in, like I was in the first case, just making sure that you try to do as much as you can as far as resources are concerned to make sure your well-being. I mean, that's just my input on that.
Can you repeat what you just said? Because I'm trying to figure out which aspect I'm going to answer.
So I guess for you, just kind of the legal side of it, if there's a senior or someone that's elderly in a domestic domestic violence, intimate violence situation, how can someone in the community kind of help that person?
I know you're talking physical violence or just any type of domestic, financial?
Yeah.
Okay, now, when I was in the DA's office, I did financial card fraud. And a lot of it stemmed from people using their check or doing that. But you would have been surprised to find out how many were elderly individuals whose caregivers, and a caregiver could be a family member, that were using their accounts, their credit cards to be on Amazon, buying stuff, and so in those situations, the advice, well, I can't give advice, but what we told them that they should do is, and a lot of times they don't want to prosecute these people because it's their daughter, their son, and so that's when you have to probably refer them to Adult Protective Service and let them come in, step in and maybe assign them a caregiver from the financial part of it. When I did financial fraud cases, I was not sympathetic to anybody who took advantage of the elderly. And in that case, what I said is, I'm not giving you a plea deal. Another DA might do that, but we're going to trial. Because if we take advantage of this 90-year-old or 80-year-old, and you're 20 and 30 or 40, and credit card ran up to $2,000, $3,000, that is just unacceptable. So, but at the same time, I would try to figure out if there is another family member that could step in and take care of them. And sometimes by the time it's brought to us, the state, it's another family member who realizes what's going on. Right. And that's the financial part. As far as the abusive part of it, that's where Adult Protective Service comes in. And the funny thing is, they have been in that situation for so long, it's a marriage, that they don't see it as abuse. They're from the era where the man is the man of the house and what he says goes. Then here you have granddaughter now is asking, is now, knows that this is not acceptable and trying to tell grandma, this is abuse. It's a hard battle for the younger generation to fight for them. And so when they finally come to their senses, it's hard to leave. They don't have any money. They never went to school and did education. They have been retired, living off Social Security income, and unless they have a child who's willing to take them in, there's nowhere for them to go. And I've had elderly couples who, the woman, after, both of them were in their 70s, who said, I've had enough. And he was charged with assaulting a female in his 80s, never had a criminal record, because she never reported it before, but that day he pushed her so hard, she hit her head against the wall. And the daughters now, who are in their 40s, decided that no, Mom, they grew up seeing him beating her, but it was a part of their life. You don't tell anybody, don't tell Miss Jenny that hit me, But now that I know. So here they are in their 70s and 80s, getting a divorce, assets needs to be split, and how do you tell? And she was being pushed by her children to do this. When I spoke to her individually, she didn't want to go forward with it, because all she was worried about was, he's getting first stage of Alzheimer's, who's going to take care of him? And never mind, you have this big bump in the back of your head, and so when they have children to take them in, it's easy, but when they don't, then it's Adult Protective Service. There's nothing you can do. Because it's harder for them, because they have no resources, no income, nobody else to take care of them. Young people are resilient, they can bounce back most of the times, but not the elderly folks. So how do you go about doing that? Adult Protective Service, caseworker, case management, is that what you?
Yeah, I was asking that was a trick question. I am an Adult Protective Service worker.
Yeah.
And then when you come across these situations that, we've had some cases where the person may have dementia, and a lot of times when someone has dementia, especially males, they get really violent. I've had some hits myself as a worker. But then you have those situations that, you have your senior clients, that they're in the court. They're, like you said, in their 70s and 80s, and you're going to get charged because this is not acceptable, and you're putting this person at risk and yourself, because we don't know how this can turn. It could turn into a very nasty situation that we have to come in and we have to get law enforcement involved because it's too violent. So a lot of people, you know, kind of, they do come to us, but then a lot of times we have to turn back to like the Family Justice Center and law enforcement and the legal system and taking, you know, those actions, especially financially. That is just like, being in this line of work, it's just been so much an eye-opening experience to see how many people just take advantage of the kindness of grandma's purse.
Yes.
But that's why I said I wanted to ask my question, because I think a lot of people don't think about, you know, that other growing population of, you know, when you're growing up and grandma and great grandma, the man runs the house and, you know, just him hitting me every so often is okay.
It's okay, yeah, he brings over the bags.
That's your grandfather.
Yeah.
And see, that was the situation with the lady that was a millionaire, her husband was the one taking advantage. She didn't have any family, nobody. Like, she didn't have any kids, she didn't have any siblings, she didn't have anybody else, like, he was the only.
So he knew, that was a predator.
Right,
Yeah.
so that's why we decided to call like an adult protective services, because we were like, who else are we supposed to call? And just to say, like, if anybody's watching or listening, anybody can call these services. It doesn't have to be a family member or anybody related to the situation.
Yeah, anybody can file a adult protective report. You can get us 24/7. You know, we have someone on call. Well, I know here in Guilford County, we're 24/7.
Can they hear her? Can the live feed hear her? Cause that's very good information for some people to hear.
We're all being, so it's mandated by law to report it.
What I wanted them to hear is what kind of resources that might be available when if you guys have anything, you know, what kind of resources.
Actually, closed captions.
Okay,
Perfect.
so what kind of resources?
I mean, anyone for anybody in any county, you can call, that Department of Social Services, and they should have an adult service portion. They usually, when you call, you can get any type of resources if you have questions, especially when it deals with like the abuse or exploitation of someone that's, anybody's over 18, that's disabled or needs some assistance. So that's always available in every county. We do a pretty good job, but that's just a resource that anybody can use if they feel like it's necessary. A lot of times with abuse, we do have to get law enforcement and the Family Justice Center and other resources involved, because it's a little beyond our scope. It can be a danger for us as the work is going out, because we've had situations that it's been really dangerous for us to go into the home without anybody. So that resource is there, but I think a lot of people think we're just there to like take grandma out of the house and put them in the nursing home, but that it goes beyond that. You know, anybody that's in an unsafe situation, we are able to come in and help. But like you all were saying, anybody feels any suspicion or inkling, they can call any county DSS to get assistance from adult services, and they can, you know, determine what needs to happen at that point.
See, because the elderly have been brainwashed into believing domestic violence is physical abuse. And it has to be it's not a shove, it's not a slap. It has to be some very aggressive, beat you up, swollen face, you know. So for them, a little shove, a little push every now and then, or verbal abuse, they don't think that was abuse. That was just part of being married, you know. That's the better or worse part of being married. Argument, you know, telling you you're worthless, telling you can't amount to anything, you know. So it's now when the younger generation has seen new categories of abuse, find even digital abuse now, you know, there's digital abuse, right? People stalking you by cell phones, texting and stuff like that. They can't grasp that concept that he didn't push me down the steps or broke a bone in my body, so it wasn't abuse. It's hard for them to understand that grandpa who was pushing you here or telling you my dinner better be ready when I get home, or, you know, where's the food, and pushing you around, it's still hard for them. That is not part of the marriage. Because a lot of them got married at what, 14, 15 years old? Had no job, and in my 80s, no, you're trying to tell me grandpa is abusing me? You know, that's not real, that's not right. But it's getting more common than we think. A lot of, I had one this week, 40 years. I think she just got tired of him.
Can you blame her?
Because she was laughing by the time the hearing was over, and she was laughing, and but she said, I said, enough is enough, you know, but, yeah.
Well, and just to add, on my team, the team I work for, we are.
Which car is that?
We're doing the doors propped open.
We can close it.
Thank you, thank you. Somebody just walked in and wasn't supposed to be here.
What door?
I think it means the very front door. Sorry, my kid's out there, I just wanted to make sure they weren't the issue. But we specialize. So I do sexual assault, I have staff that do child abuse. There's some that work specifically with the LGBTQ plus community for all the stuff that happens to those folks. And then we do have an elder abuse advocate. Her name is Mari, she's a graduate of UNCG, and she is very well versed in all things gerontology and all things around here. I would venture to guess you've probably either talked to her or met her. And she understands, because with elder abuse, like y'all have been kind of saying, they don't want to leave. They just want the abuse to stop. And honestly, with most versions of violence that people experience within the home, they really don't necessarily want to leave. They do just really want it to stop. And so Mari's a great resource for any older folks that maybe just need that extra layer of support, and she can also help them find some of those resources that maybe combat those underlying causes. Like she had mentioned that dementia can lead to violence. Well, maybe that person the person with dementia needs more support and he needs resources, and that might be a way to fix the situation without having to remove the person from the home, if that makes sense. And so there are tons of resources out there, and it's just, the Family Justice Center really does. If you call them, they can be like, okay, there's these 18 resources. If you need more information about it, let us get you in touch. Because that's gonna be your best bet. Navigating some of these situations on your own is very stressful. We do it on the daily, we're kind of used to it, and so it's different. But when y'all are dealing with people, maybe as friends and family members, that's a lot of stress on yourselves as well. So please make sure to take care of yourselves when you're engaging in these situations, because if you aren't taking care of yourselves, you're not gonna have anything left to give to the people that are coming to you. So that was a little off topic, but I did want to throw that out there because this is kind of a heavy topic, and I always worry about people who are engaging in these conversations, how you're going to walk away from it. Is it going to be a heavy day, or can you walk away feeling a little lighter? So,
no, let me ask you guys in the audience, if somebody was to ask you what are the types of abuse, what would you say?
Financial, physical, verbal.
What are they?
Financial, physical, verbal, mental, and then I just learned today digital, but I didn't know that it added that term today, called it stalking, or cyber stalking, but digital is the term today. But definitely have been experienced the first three: financial, mental, and physical.
And what about
emotional too? Sorry.
I had a long list. I agree with everything you said. Spiritual, emotional, and a long list.
And because years ago there was like what, 3 categories of abuse, and then it went up to 4 categories of abuse, and then there was 6, and now there's 7, and now there's 9. And I'll read them off to you: physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, which we used to group that together, emotional, psychological, they're no separate. Spiritual, cultural, verbal, financial, and neglect is abuse. Because if you neglect to take care of that elderly mom or that person, that's abuse. So it's neglect. But if you're talking about violence, it's still when somebody uses your spiritual belief to intimidate you. That is
You start from the top again, please.
It's physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, spiritual, like the young lady mentioned over here, cultural. And we see a lot of that because in their culture it's not abuse. And verbal, financial, neglect is a form of abuse, and then digital, so it's actually 10 that I just named.
Add one, I do a lot of community work with affordable housing, like residential abuse, would that be considered?
Like housing insecurity being an abuse, because we don't have any housing right now.
We could add, but we'll acknowledge and accept it, yeah. But the list is getting longer and longer and longer, and that's the point I'm trying to make, is that there's so many subtle abuse that we don't even recognize them until we start to see a statistics where more than one person is complaining about it, so.
Yeah, because I wasn't even aware of cultural abuse.
Oh, wow, that is the worst. That is the worst of cases that I see, because in our culture, that's aggressive physical abuse. But in their culture, it's just a man being the man. And it's, I have had one, they were from Middle Eastern.
I was gonna say, we have a big influx of Afghan refugees right now.
Well, no, these were Middle Eastern, and he literally beats the crap out of her if his dinner isn't ready, if his, I'm exaggerating, if his bath water isn't run, and she didn't realize it was abuse because it was a cultural thing until her daughter was now in high school and they talk about abuse, and she realizes that, Mom, you're being abused. But when you're here from a different culture and you stay in that cultural environment, like you have little Italy, little Chinatown, the Jewish community, the Jamaican area in Brooklyn, New York, or the Bronx, everybody accepts it. So it doesn't appear to be abuse because it's accepted in that culture. It's when you step outside of your culture. That when the younger generation, your daughter now goes to school and they're being taught what abuse is so they can recognize it. Then you're outside of your culture, you realize this is not acceptable in America. Now, we can't control when they get on that plane and go back for a visit or for anything, because they'll beat them when they get back there and nobody will do anything because that's the culture. But right here, it is abuse, and we see a lot of cultural abuse. It falls on the physical violence and emotional and psychological, and it's very rampant.
Do you, how often do you see, like you said, the younger generation, but even having friends from other countries, like in particular some African or West African countries, where the parents are manipulative in a way that they're using the culture to force them to do things that they, like say for instance, they're first generation American here, but because the culture was a certain way, oh, you have to give me money all the time.
Well, yeah, that's when the younger generation is not recognizing, no, I don't. And so that's where isolation comes in. Because now they isolate them from having to interact with people outside of their culture. You're going to be homeschooled from now on. Because I don't want you to go to school and get Americanized. You're going to be, and you're not going to go back to work. No, you're going to stay home and take care of the kids because you're not going to that workplace where those American women is going to tell you that, what I'm doing is wrong. So we'll see a lot. And the saddest part of that is when the child has to come in and testify on behalf of one parent and against the other parent. And they have to go back to that home environment, not necessarily because the abuser is there, but they're no back in the environment of the abuser. Mom, sister, brother, uncle, everybody always say it's because of you why your dad is in jail, or because of you he can't come home. And sometimes after the victim has a change of heart, they blame the child too. Or the person who opened their eyes. If you had mind your own business, this would have happened, because I hear that.
That's a big reason why molestation victims don't come forward.
Right.
Because of the guilt.
Like breaking up the family.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Or and also not, once you say it, then it's like, oh, my baby could have done that, and then you're ostracized, and it's.
I don't know, you remember, I'm a glutton for punishment, but I like to watch those Snap and ID channel shows and stuff like that. And years ago, there was a family, I think it was in the Bronx, where the father and the arranged husband killed his daughter because her dating outside of her race and outside of her culture was an embarrassment to them and for them. And, appearance. Keeping up appearances is very important. He actually killed his daughter and cut her up. Because you would rather her die than be faced with the embarrassment from their culture.
That's big in India.
Yes, it was.
Wife burning too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing for them. The embarrassment of you being outside of your race and your culture, they would kill you.
They do it for rape too.
Yes.
If you get raped, they kill you. What is it, there's a cleansing murder, I can't remember what they're called, but I know they did it, there was one in Texas a couple years ago, where they killed both their daughters.
And it's in your culture, there's nothing wrong with that.
With stones even.
Yeah.
Like, they do it brutally, it's never gentle.
Imagine being stoned to death because you had an affair, and that's a cultural thing. And so in their mind, there's nothing wrong with it. So that's the hardest battle that we fight, is a
I have a
cultural
question. Pertaining to the situation that just happened was in Davidson County, where the people went to the, okay, so I have one of my parents. She's in a domestic thing, but now she won't go to get no help because of that.
What happened in Davidson County?
Well, when they went to get,
He was
The
trying
young
to.
man was
mentally,
something was already wrong with him. His mother was reaching out to family justice services, no one took her serious. And so the young lady and her 2 kids.
Oh, that situation where they were seen on camera and they were in the homicide, suicide
yeah.
situation, okay.
so, and we're telling them to document stuff, but wasn't that a form of documentation when they went?
I don't know the entire, inside scoop of it to say, all I heard was what was put on social media, and I saw a picture of them appearing at the police station or something to that effect, but like, Ms. Phelps had said before, you may want them to leave, but when their mental, intimidation and psychological intimidation is so deep, even though they're asking you for help, they're not asking you for help. They're running to you on the surface, I need help, but when you tell them what it entails for them to get help or have to do, they don't want to do it. Now, I don't know if that was the situation in that case, but I'm just saying, because a lot of, they know what to do. But they don't want to do it, because the question I would ask people when I investigate a domestic case, when they come in for a trial and they were telling me about 5 years now and 4 years now, well, why did you put up with this? Because these women are professionals, they have a job, they can pay their own way, they have their own home, their own car. Oh, why? Because I love him.
That ain't
100%.
Well, I hear so many women say that, I hear so many women say, that's why my original question was, do you go to the root? Because for me, from experience, when you are, it started at 5 with me. I'm 41 now, and I had to retrain my mind into thinking or into knowing what love really was, because a lot of women are thinking that that's love, because I thought that it was love because my dad was the first one that hit me.
But
So
guess who has to go to the root?
Huh?
Who has to go to the root?
The victim.
Right.
Right, but if it's not, many victims don't know that it starts from the root. Many victims don't believe that it starts from the root.
Right, and you can tell them it starts, but if they do not want to find out if it does start from the root, there's nothing you can do. You can flap your gums and your lips all you want, and they don't want to go. Because when I hear that, I get sick to the stomach sometimes, because you're coming in here with a PhD, a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, and you're educated. This man doesn't live with you because you have your own home. He only comes to visit, and every time he comes, he's beating you, or he stays with you and he beats you, and you can't put him out, and you can, but you can pay your own way. You don't need him. Why are you putting up with this verbal, emotional, physical, psychological,
Sometimes
sexual abuse?
fear will keep you
Well,
stuck.
So I was gonna say, because that's me, right?
Fear.
Like, I have a master's, I'm educated, I can make my own money, I can do my own thing or whatever, but I can tell you from experience, like when I went to get the ex parte order, you know, when I started writing down everything, because it was like 3 pages long, when I started writing down everything, that's when everything started sinking in. And then when I gave it to the lady down at the courthouse, and she was like, oh, I'll let you know when it's time for you to go upstairs. And I'm like, wait a minute. You mean I have to go in a courtroom and say all of this stuff? Like I have to actually, it's because I was like, is it just gonna be me and the judge? Or she was like, no, it's an open courtroom. So then at that point, I started getting the feeling like, ooh, I don't know if I really wanna go through this because it's the embarrassment, it's the, and especially like in my situation, we were a power couple, we had this, whole facade thing going. So I'm like, and then it started becoming, protecting the abuser, because I'm like, okay, if I go public with this stuff, now it's gonna be public record, all of that stuff, and I'm like, okay, now everybody's gonna know all these horrible things that have happened to me, and so I started getting cold feet, because I was like, I don't wanna do this anymore.
Well, that's good though, that's good, but that's not the same as because I love him. That's the thing. That's not the same as because I love him. Because these people are not married. It's an assault on a female charge. They're not even married. They're dating or living together, and she's taking care of him.
And that's why I was like, there's different aspects to that. It's not always love thing, because I'm like,
You're trying to protect his identity as well.
His identity, my identity, all of that
goes
stuff. It was a lot. So that's why I was like, I already knew the love stuff wasn't there anymore, because, I could think through that. But it was the other stuff. And also what I talked about earlier with the financial abuse. So it was all of that stuff. And then, mind you, for me, that is like an identity crisis. Because this is what I do all day, every day. And people are looking at me to help them with their money. Meanwhile, my house situation is a total craziness, like crazy house. So it's like all of those things I started thinking about, like, oh my God. And I can see how a lot of people will, even if they're educated professionals, will back out, at that time, because I almost did. But then I was like, you know what, no, I gotta go through with this, because if not, they'll never be held accountable. And that's the thing with narcissists now. I'm not trying to diagnose anybody, but that's the thing is they're never held accountable, because they're so manipulative and people do back out, or if this situation happened before. So I was like, no, I gotta hold this person accountable. And so I decided that even though I was sitting in the courtroom boo-hoo, like even before I got up there, like the tears, it was so emotionally draining. But I said, I have to do this, I have to.
And that's what I mean when I say that support. Because you have someone that's constantly pushing you, letting you know, hey, this is okay. It's okay. Just because you have a degree, just because you have a master's, you're not supposed to experience nothing. Right? Like for me, I am a recovering addict. I would be one of the best ones to tell someone how to get off of drugs, because I've experienced it myself. And that's my passion, is to help people in the area. But that's not to say I haven't been through anything. It's like, one thing that I've always said, and not to be judgmental or anything, but anyone that has never put a crack pipe up to their mouth could never fully understand where I come from. And that's just my opinion. I could be dead wrong, but that's my opinion. So that's what I mean when I say, it's fear, getting down to the root of, well, why do you think that this is okay? Or what makes you think that this is okay? And for you not to think like that because you have a degree, it's kind of contradictory to me.
Can I ask a question? Because I'm sure that we've all heard this, or at least those of us, the recording came out. When you were growing up and a little boy was picking on you at school, what were you told? Because I know what I was told.
Because guys like you, boys like you.
So then we grow up and they beat on us and we're like, he likes me. So that could be that could also be part of that starting that root. Because I know, basically anyone I know that is, was born as a woman, will say that. Yeah, my mom, my aunt, my grandma, my sister, whoever, oh, he likes you. And so that's part of that is we haven't taught little boys how to show that they like other little girls without being violent, but at the same time, we're already conditioning our small children to be abused and see it as a form of love. That's their love language. Well,
right.
Learn a new one.
One of the things I was going to add when we were talking about when you ran down the demographics of women with degrees and things that look well established and still experience these things, to your point, the vulnerability of it being, you know, one, like you said, you were going to go in and you thought like, no, I can't go through this because of your identity, everything you built for yourself is like the community will know, right? Because it is a very vulnerable experience to be in that courtroom in front of people. It's like your business is out there.
Right.
That may be something that can be looked at, like having the court that experience be a lot more private, not necessarily you have your own situation, but how do we mitigate that or change that to be more progressive to protect people's privacy, not just when you have thousands of dollars to go into mediation to do that. Like how do we protect those that don't have access to those resources? Other part of that is sometimes you don't even realize it because you just got into it and you're like, damn, how did I get here?
Right.
You know, it's like, how did I get here? Because I never thought I'd see myself in this situation. Again, if it's a narcissistic personality, you didn't see it coming because you just, you know, you're looking at certain things in this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and then also you're looking at, well, you recognize the obvious abuse, you know, with, you know, mom or dad or things like that. You can see the obvious abuse growing up as a child. You know it wasn't right, but then you're like, well, I ended up in a situation because of the list of new categories of abuse. You're like, well, damn, I've been abused all the time. They had no idea, but you don't know until you are aware, you know, so you don't know what you don't know. And to your point, titles, degrees, labels always serve as blinders to things. I mean, think about people who are public figures who are abusing spouses, whether it's a male or female, they're abusing their spouse at home because of their title. You know, they've got a title and it's, oh, they wouldn't do that, that's a city council person. Or they wouldn't do that because that's a judge. Well, why is it that we dehumanize or take away their humanness because of that title? Pastor wouldn't do that, but pastor has 3 extramarital children, and then pending 50B. By 2 women in the congregation and a 50B from a pedophilia because he was out somewhere with the underage child who looked like she was over 18.
But that's pastor, you better not say that.
Right. You know, so again, back to the spiritual and religious abuse that happens a lot of times. You know, you can't play the piano or sing in the choir until you do this for me, you know. So those types of things happen, but you don't know, and then sometimes you're in such shock, like, did this just happen to me? Did this person just say this to me? And then again, afraid of coming out because afraid of blaming the victim.
But especially, for example, in my experience, when I left my harm-doer, my family didn't talk to me anymore. Because he put on such a great show for them and went to them when we split up and said all these things that I was doing, that nobody would listen to me, but I left the house with $10 and just my child, and then he killed my pets. And it was my fault. I should have taken them with me. Well, I literally left with my child, their diaper bag, and a car seat, $10 to my name, and went and found family members to stay with. And nobody believed me because they all knew this person, this version of him. And still to this day, my dad says that never happened. He is still friends with that ex, and he was like, no, you blew it up, or you made it this, or no, you didn't make half as much as him and pay all the bills. And so it is, and that's another reason why people stay, is I lost my family. I have one family member from before him. And so it's not just the public figures, and it's not just society blaming you, it's those closest to you, your support system, your friends, your family, and even sometimes your children.
And I would say, just from my situation, that's exactly what was going to happen. But I was encouraged by someone who was just a podcast guest, because we were supposed to have our podcast interview, and I was like, I can't do this right now. I just broke down crying. And she's like, well, what's going on? Luckily, she studies like psychotherapy and stuff like that. So I started telling her a little bit about my situation. She said, Tiffany, what you need to do, she was like, have you talked to anybody? I said, no. She said, what you need to do is your closest friends, your family, just let them know. Start having conversations. And that's what encouraged me to start talking about it to my closest people. And once I started doing that, series of events, I was able to get up the courage and, all that stuff. But also, what the ex did was started trying to go to everybody that I had already talked to. Luckily, I had already talked to them because she warned me about that. She said, well, what's gonna happen is, because that's what happened to her, she was like, if you don't open your mouth now, and you wait until the abuser gets their story out before yours, then that can also, because she said she lost her family. And I was like, okay, so I started opening up, and then I was like, well, do I have to do it in person? I was like, yeah, I was like, can I just do it over the phone? She said, no, what you need to do is, she was like, get your closest girlfriends, go out to lunch, and you need to talk about this in person in front of people. And that's what I started doing, and luckily I did, because like I said, he's like, even to this day, he was asking for my dad's number, like, not me, because he can't talk to me, but like, calling my family members, asking for my family members' numbers, friends' numbers, things like that, still trying to reach out to people to get his story out, his version of the situation. So that's exactly what happens. And then, like, it worked with his family, because like, when I talked to his mom, she was like, well, Tiffany, if you found somebody else, and I'm just like, what? Like, for real? So it's like, you know, the people that knew me, like really knew me, my close family, my close friends, you know, people in the community and stuff, when he finally got to them, they were like, this doesn't even sound like Tiffany. Right. Like, isolation. Yeah, this doesn't even sound like Tiffany. So just to piggyback off of what you said, just to encourage people to start talking to people, get that out there.
I think my issue was, I would say, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And my family just was like, you're never going. So my family just stopped talking to me altogether. And they was like, until you leave, we're not gonna help you, right? And so it took me 8.5 years to finally get tired and walk away. He's the best dad. He's an awesome dad, but he's a narcissist. Yeah, so I just encourage women to just leave and find the peace and maintain yourself. And that's been one of my bigger movements is you can't keep telling people you're gonna leave if you're not gonna leave, because they're not gonna believe you either. And that was one of the hardest things too, is not having the support when you're ready to leave.
And I would say too, something that I tell like my financial coaching clients, everybody come to me when they like serious struggle, but I'm like, it doesn't matter how deep it is, there's always a way out of it. So that's kind of the same situation with this too, like when it comes to the financial abuse and all types of abuse, doesn't matter how deep it is, you can always find a way out. And so I think that's important to get across too.
Going back to our situation, and like you said, how deep it is, sometimes I've learned with other friends that have experienced abuse, is you have to let them see it first, because sometimes you can tell them to leave, but you don't have that emotional attachment that they have to that person. So it's easier to say, oh, girl, you need to leave, or guy, you need to leave. But sometimes as a friend, you want so bad for them to get out of that situation because you've seen where somebody didn't make it out alive. And then you're like, I love you, but I have to love you from a distance now, because one, your abuser could also harm me and my family because in his attempt or her attempt to isolate you. But then also, you've got to see it. You got to be sick and tired of being sick and tired, as you said. And sometimes you can't do that when you've got everybody in your ear. And also, you're like, well, you haven't seen this side of him. He does love you because there's a glimpse of light that they give you. It's, I forgot what they call it, breadcrumbing you. So it's they're giving you breadcrumbs of light. Like, he does love me because he got me roses and he got me this to offset the 8 black eyes you had in the past 2-3 weeks. And so, but being able to be strong enough to give that person space and, you know, let them talk to you, but then stay distant enough to say, you know what, you've got to see this for yourself, and I can't keep talking to you or listening to idle conversation until you want to help yourself bad enough to take action. And that was the hardest thing I had to learn as a friend, but it was peaceful because I didn't carry that weight as well. But then they also came around and was like, you know what, I saw it, and I'm so glad that you distant, because I started to notice you wasn't answering my phone calls as much anymore. I started to notice that I would pick up to hear your voice if you're okay, are you all right? Because I want to make sure you're alive, but at the same time, it's like I still gotta let you go through that processing of coming full circle to say, okay, now it's time for me to take action. And that's how we help our people build accountability too. Because sometimes in families, people, or friendships, or any type of person you love, you want to save them, you want to coddle them, and in reality, you're not asking them what decisions are you making to either remove yourself, or what decisions are you making to enable this situation to keep happening.
And they don't have control, and when you start giving them advice and telling them what to do, you're also not giving them the control over their own life. And that's the thing that a lot of times I think we forget, is that each of us is the expert in our own experience, in our own life, in our own needs, our own wants, and our dreams. And so if I think you need to exit and I'm pushing and pushing and pushing, I'm never once considering what you actually want or need and not giving the control back. And so you're 100% right.
And do you mind if I share?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so she's talking about me. I'm one of the people she's talking about, because that's exactly what happened. And to the point where there was, we were supposed to meet up for lunch, and a whole situation broke out where he was trying to prevent me from leaving and all of this stuff. But she's still on the phone with me, and she's like, Tiffany, is everything okay? Do I need to call the police? This, that, and the other. He had my phone, he started cursing her out. And so she started putting herself in harm's way, trying to help me. And then it was pretty much at that moment, 'cause it wasn't too long after that, where I realized, I'm like, okay, this is starting to cross the line. Because I'm like, not only are you disrespecting me, you're disrespecting my friends, you're disrespecting my family. It's just becoming too much. So that was a situation that actually happened, and that was one of the triggers for me where I was like, okay, enough is enough. So just to go along with her point, you can step in and try to help, but it's not until that person kind of starts internalizing things like, okay, and not when I say internalizing, not blaming themselves, but starting to realize what's going on, and then they have to be the ones to pull the trigger. Because she kept telling me all the time, Tiffany, this is not a healthy situation, for at least a year or so. And then, eventually I started coming to my senses, and I was like, yeah, no.
I have a question for.
I think it's a good time for you to come in. What is it, morning? I've had a long last few days, so. Domestic. People love, people don't love, people in call up in flesh, and call up in fact. I don't want to be without money, I don't want to be without a home, I don't want to be without a car, I don't want to be without my children, all kinds of stuff. As the sheriff, I get a chance to see a lot of things. As a human being, I've even lived through life basically. When I watch and I listen to the stories, because just like you said, no one can tell. Everybody has a story. The issue or the key component to it is not allow people to take your narrative and make it theirs. They were not called names or anything like that. But you're right. Lawyers, doctors, law enforcement, businessmen, we see it all. And when it comes across my desk for me to do the sign an emergency permit or something, I step back and immediately I begin to pray. I have to. Because I'm wondering, is this I have to be careful. Because I don't want to be it's already twofold, but I don't want it to be something that I've done or I did not do to take for someone to lose a life. We've seen that in this area. We've seen it throughout the country. Keeping people from going back. I was in a conversation like that just last night. It ties in. With restaurant. And the individual, as I was leaving, was talking to me, pulled me to the side, I want to talk to me about a situation. And I listened, and I heard the number 7. They've been back and forth 7 times, 50 beats. I said, now, I'm gonna be honest with you. I said, I'm gonna give you that first one. That second one, then, you know, somebody don't mess around here. Maybe will wake it. But the other 5, what are you waiting on? What are they waiting on? And I tell them, I say, you know, the best thing to do is always remember self. And then if you have those children, remember those children are with you. And if you have parents who are engaged or want to be involved in the marriage because of issues, remember them. Because people have gotten to a point, and they've done it for years, don't mind killing nobody. And the first thing they'll do, they'll go to court. And it was in the heat of passion.
Yeah.
And then you get a weak jury. Or better yet, a weak judge. And they'll buy that story.
Because that is a defense. And heat of passion, because they're saying that in that moment when that person behavior, you know, set you over that emotional edge, temporary insanity.
And you have to really, with us, with me, I read what I get from the course, which comes from the victim. And you have to read it and read it. For me, I have to read it. Because I'm looking for underlying issues. If there are any. And although we may not want to admit it and see it, but sometimes they do be. They are. But if it's not, at least more than one set of eyes have seen it. And that's the key. And it just bothered me last night. I heard this individual back and forth 7 times. It wasn't even in the evidence, but then nevertheless, be careful because I go too far. And then when they begin to start reaching out to family members, if you're innocent, you're innocent. But those that are trying to cover stuff up, they want to talk to everybody and the dog. No. I can learn over the years to document stuff. Keep it true. Document. You know? And tell the story. And make sure you tell the story to someone that's going to be true to you and that. Because if he gets one that tell the story, and they just take your side, and they hadn't heard the other side, or better yet, they can see the side, then it's different. But you have to, I tell people, make sure, and I'm hoping I'm not wrong, because I might tell it, I said, make sure that the whole story is told. Oh, it hurts. Oh man, it hurts. You cry. You feel embarrassed. You're ashamed. You're angry. All that mess. And you sit right up in there and of course listen to all your business. I can talk about it. And you sit there thinking, like you said, how did I get here? So, a small amount of people that are in this room, which is very important, I'm misunderstanding all of the important. But in Guilford County, 560,000 plus people, even 1.5% of them deal with domestic issues. But you go outside and tell what's going on in the house. I don't know. The room should be jam-packed. Should be. You know? I've been here early, we've been trying to get in, and I'm trying to get in. The owner couldn't get in.
The door was locked.
Door messed up.
Oh, yeah, I had to let it back in.
A lot of things, I was here. But I thank you all for coming and telling the story, coaching and educating each other. Education is powerful. It only becomes powerful when it's in utilized. Right?
Yeah, why?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
She wants to know how do I report law enforcement? If my spouse works in law enforcement, how do I report that?
This is very simple. Please write this down. Please write this down.
Please repeat the question.
The question is, if your spouse, partner, friend, or whatever is a abuser, and he or she is employed in law enforcement, how do I report that? 911. 911. And if you don't feel comfortable with that one, Sheriff Danny H. Rogers, 336-894-4319. That is my cell phone. That's real talk. Do not allow me. I don't care what profession they're in, what they do, good they are, or whatever you, continue. Real talk. They get caught up in what?
Sad.
There it is. There it is. I don't care. You can get that anyway. You don't mean I want to, but get me. Don't allow that to get you killed.
Right.
That's what it is. So 911 and Sheriff Danny H. Rogers, 336-894-4319. Have I had to respond to it already? Yes. Real quick. We take you on the front line real quick. Put you over there and do that. What's it, 48 hours or 72 hours?
It's 48 a week,
48
72
hours.
weeks for the weekend.
Yeah. And we'll be taking to, I will be taking, we make sure that they're not included in the general population, so no one will say they're abusing them until they go to court. That's right.
I think we get caught up with uniforms.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not, and I know people in the judicial system gets caught up with uniforms. He's an officer, I don't think he would do that. Or if he's a judge, I don't think he would do that. You know.
Or military.
Military. But at the end of the day, they're human beings just like the rest of us. And it's their job, and this uniform they wear to work. I find that a lot of people in the judicial and law enforcement agencies are abusers. But there's a subtle abuse. It's the financial abuse. It's the verbal abuse. You know, that it might escalate to physical abuse. And so when they come for prosecution, sometimes if they're from Guilford County prosecutor's office or a judge here might recuse themselves and let somebody from another county come in because they don't want that appearance of being biased. So that happens because I've seen where troopers, sheriffs, and somebody else in the judicial system or law enforcement who have been accused of domestic violence. Partners come in, and because even on the 50B paper, the restraining order paper, there is a box to check if this person is in law enforcement, because a part of the restraining order is they cannot have their weapons. They cannot carry their gun, possess, receive, or purchase a weapon. And so once they're served, they have to take them off duty because they can't carry any guns with them. Yeah, so and we tend to think that because of the uniform, we forget that they're also regular human beings just like the rest of us.
To add to that, I think we talked about root cause, right? A lot of people forget that a lot of prior military and officers alike experience PTSD in the field that goes unaddressed as well. They could naturally be abusers, but also just having been in combat and overseas, or having them be exposed to things that they never thought they'd be exposed to out in the field, they have PTSD, not wanting to go to a therapist, not wanting to talk about it, but then you take it out on the people that are closest to you.
And that's what some of the victims say. They were not like this until they got out of the military, or they just started acting like this after they came back from overseas, or, you know. And sometimes post-traumatic stress disorder or syndrome is not only because of military. It could be from a death of a loved one, it could be from an accident, it could be from giving childbirth, it could be from anything that was traumatic to you. And anything can trigger it. So, one of the questions that I had for you ladies in here and gentlemen, do you know the signs of a potential abuser?
I don't think so, man.
Are the most obvious ones actually?
You said the most obvious ones?
Mm-hmm.
Or the ones you see at the very beginning of a
And
relationship.
that's what I mean, when you know this person is gonna be an abuser, but now you think it's love. Oh, he loves me so much, he won't let me talk to my friends. Control. He loves me so much, he's so jealous every time I leave the house. He wants to know where I'm at.
Conversation at times with friends, not allowing you to have a healthy time away from them, jealousy of family members.
Going through your personal stuff.
And you don't need to order that food on the menu. I'll order it for you, honey. Oh, he's so sweet. He knows what I want.
And he brought you flowers and jewelry, and he's gonna buy you a new car, I'll pay your car insurance too.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, love coffee, that's important.
You don't have to go to work, I got it, baby, just stay right here there.
Don't leave though.
Don't leave.
What time you say you was getting off work today? What time are you gonna end?
Yeah,
Where do you
yeah.
go?
Why is
Are there men at the meeting? Do you have business meetings with men by yourself?
He loves me so much, he just want to make sure that everywhere I go, I'm safe. So he wants to know where I'm at all
I have to have
times.
my location on, can't go nowhere.
Or what they'll start doing is sending you pictures of where they want you to believe that they are early, and it's like, why are you sending me pictures of your whereabouts? Because you want me to reciprocate, but I'm not gonna do that because I have boundaries, so, yeah.
Google is such a good resource these days. You can get too much information, sometimes it's overwhelming, but everybody should be able to recognize some of the signs when it's in your situation. It's not love all the time. Yeah, sure, when you're in that honeymoon phase, everything looks like love, but sometimes those are signs that this person is later on going to be a controller.
Sometimes it can be intuition too, telling you as a sign. Sometimes your intuition it tells you, and unfortunately, we just, like you said, overlook it, but you can feel that there's something there. It's not a comforting space, but you're like, oh, what's me? Maybe I'm nervous, and especially after you've experienced it, you can sniff it a mile away that, you know, something there's a missing piece to this puzzle here.
And I mean, hindsight's 20/20, of course.
Right.
But, you know, like even when I think back, like month 3, there was a huge red flag that I just sweeped on over, you know what I'm saying? And I was like going through my phone. And I said, I don't appreciate you going through my phone, you know, if you want to know something, you know, let me know, whatever. And then that boundary kept getting crossed over and over and over and over again, to the point it was just the norm. But that was a huge red flag that I just glazed over.
One of the other ones is they battle for attention.
All the time.
They will do things to make you take your attention away from your family and friends so you can go tend to them. So if you're at a party or a family gathering, they'll do something intentionally hurt themselves so you can come and care after them, or they will walk away and isolate themselves for a long time to cause you to remove yourself and go tend to them.
And be careful if you see these red flags for your friends, because once you start telling them, they're gonna stop talking to you. I had a friend call me at the beginning of this year to ask me if it was a red flag that a guy she'd been talking to for 2 weeks wanted to put her on his car insurance. She's not had car insurance in 10 years. So she's had multiple speeding tickets. Car insurance for her is right around $800 a month. And so when she said this and said, hey, I think it's a red flag, what do you think? I was like, sure. Dumbest answer ever. I haven't talked to her since. And they are in a relationship. It's all over Facebook, and my friends have told me about it. And it was, so just knowing the red flags is great, but it comes back to that friendship and kind of letting people live their own lives for themselves. I caution you to start pointing them all out because people get defensive really quick.
Or speaking, what was it that said in the beginning, do not speak ill of the abuser? Because when they get back together, guess who is the bad guy? You.
And they're gonna repeat every word you said.
You know what I tell them when my friends call me? Well, won't you tell me what you want to tell me? And when they tell me what happened, I say, well, how does that sound to you?
Right.
Yep.
How does it sound to you? Does it make sense to you? Well, no, then here's your answer. I'm not gonna be the one to tell you to leave him and then next week they're getting married and, you know, and I gotta sit there like a fool watching them one on the album. I was like, no, I stopped doing that years ago. Especially since I start doing the work that I'm doing now. When they call me, and even because I'm in the judicial system, they'll call me for, I tell my friends and my family just to get out of it, I can't give legal advice. Right. And you're my cousin. I can't give legal advice. Because the last thing I need for you to do is to go tell them that she told me this, you know. Or it's because of you why we're not together, because you told me this is what. So I don't. I direct them. Family Justice Center. Here's a list of lawyers, and I tell people I cannot recommend a particular lawyer to you. Who is the best lawyer in town? I can't do that because you go back and say, well, Judge Pemberton told me to call you. That's unethical. I can't promote one lawyer over another. I can't do that. So I say, here's a list of 3 or 4. You go talk to them and you decide which one you want. You know, but do you really think I need a lawyer? Well, do you think you need a lawyer? Question back to them. Do you think you need a lawyer? Well, I don't think so. And why don't you think so? And they say, well, you know, if you don't think you need a lawyer, then maybe you don't need a lawyer. But that's your decision. So just be careful, because then you become the bad person. And nothing is more embarrassing than seeing your friend with somebody that you done told you don't need to be with, and you know they went back and told them. Yeah. And you have to be faking it like you really still like them, or just be all right, say don't talk to me, because I can't fake it. So I'll just tell them, if you go back to them, just don't come around me. I tell my friends that, do not come to my house, do not come around me if you go back to them, because I know what I said about them in the past, and so from now on, I don't say anything.
Don't you come over here. That's my because I'm not.
So to wrap up, can you just briefly give us the steps, the financial steps to take to get out of a domestic situation?
Yeah, so I would say the first step, so if this is somebody that is the victim, the person being abused, and let's say for instance they're in a situation where they're not making money, or they're making money but it's not enough, so on and so forth. Like I said before, there's never a situation too difficult to get out of. Like, there's always a way. And if you need help trying to figure out the strategy, there are people like myself, shameless plug, but that can help you kind of strategize that. Like, I've helped people strategize getting out of abusive situations. I myself had to strategize, had to get out of abusive situations, all types of stuff. So there's people that have the strategies. Now, if you want to try to do it yourself, which is possible, I tell people first, it depends on the situation. I know it's always, it depends, right? But if it's a situation where, let's say with me, we had everything joint, so all of our accounts were joint, I started separating things. I made my own account and said, you know what, okay, this is not working. I need to make an account, you can make your own account. We need to figure something out because obviously the whole joint situation is not working. So I started separating out things, he started separating out things. And so what that did for me was, I'm like, oh, I actually have some money. Like, I'm actually able, like, it's not me, you know, because I was internal, I was like, you know, am I not good with money? Like I told y'all before, it was like an identity crisis. I'm like, am I not good with money? But when I started separating things, I was like, oh, you know, it's not me anymore. And so that started giving me the confidence in order to do that. And so start separating things out and then start budgeting. I always tell people budgeting is like the first step to everything because that is how you develop your plan. So if you know how much you need to survive, then you can, you know, kind of, so what I tell people is put your expenses down, okay? Find out what your number is. So like, let's say for instance, and I'm just gonna throw a random number. Let's say it's $1,000, you need $1,000 every month to survive. Then you can break that down into how much do I need to make daily in order to make that number. Now when you start doing that, you realize, oh, it's actually something that's attainable. If $1,000 is your number and you break that divided by 30, you know, the number is really small. You can say, okay, maybe I can, I don't know, get creative. Crochet something or make something or whatever, and then you can start getting that money up in order to cover your budget and then start making a plan to exit the situation. But I feel like a lot of people get stuck because they think that it's not possible. And they think it's not possible because they're looking at the big number, they're looking at the big picture. But when you start breaking it down, it makes it a little easier to comprehend, a little easier to understand, and it makes it achievable. And then when you get your financial stuff in order, it gives you the confidence to make the other steps. So I would say that would be my biggest tips for whoever is going through this type of stuff, depending on the situation. Start with getting separating things if things are joint. Then start getting your numbers in order, figure out how much you need to survive, and then break that number down into a daily or a weekly number so that way you feel like it's more attainable, and then start doing things to get that number, and then that'll give you the confidence to start taking the additional steps. Because that's what happened with me. I had to start getting my finances in order for me to go to the courthouse and file paperwork, in order to reach out to family and friends, in order to take all of those next steps. I had to build up that confidence, and the financial aspect built that up for me, so.
You know, I believe when you're married, you should have joint things. I do. But I also believe that you should have your own separate account as well. If you are a housewife, house husband, house partner, I can make sure I'm cut all that. You just have to make sure that you don't spend everything that you get. You can't. You just can't. We have not allowed, but I think a lot of us have not really been taught financial ways to do things the way, so we can save, we can be prepared for emergency situations. Those of us that are able to do that, we've learned the hard way. And unfortunately, sometimes the hard way is really hard. So I believe that you should keep that separate account and do what you do, how you do to make sure that you're prepared for you and your children to exit abusive relationship. And find a way to continue to, I agree with you. I'm not like, I'll give it a say, I want to say something. And break it down to an hour. How much money you need per hour? Per hour. If you need $15 an hour per day, every day, 8 hours a day, you need that money, that's what you know, to make sure that you can survive and do what you need to do. And then help you out. If it's that bad, Don't be sitting there trying to save money.
I was just gonna say.
Get out of there.
Because I mean, there's people that leave with nothing, and
Yeah.
they're just okay, so, yeah.
So we'll make sure I say that, but we got to have a balance. Because sometimes people will stay and they just hold on. And hold on to the cost of finances. They're trying to make, well, I don't have money. There's another death out here that will help you. So, that's the.
So they just need to stash their money, call you with 911 or call you.
No, and that's real. I mean, unfortunately, I've gotten called in the middle of the morning, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. But it seems like it's all about when the worst is going on. So, we'll make sure we get there.
And what's the legal recourse?
Well, you know, I would also like to touch on the financial quite very briefly. The scenarios here are when they have access to that money, whether they can go into the joint account or whether they can get money to go to the grocery store. But when you think about the extreme cases where they don't have any access to the money, the husband comes home and says, here's $50 for groceries, or he goes and buys the groceries and brings it home, and he has sole access to the account. That's the financial abuse. It's hard for those people to get out. If you are still in touch with friends and families, I tell them to give you cash for gifts. Don't send me a card with a gift card, or send me a card, or, you know, gift boxes. If you still have access to friends, let them give you money for your birthday, Christmas, Mother's Day, because not every one of these victims have access to the financial aspect of the relationship. They are cut off. That's the abuse. Keep them isolated, keep them dependent. So it's hard. So I say to those people, just run. Take your one suitcase and go to a shelter or go someplace. Right, don't wait to wait to get money. The legal aspect is there are legal recourses for these things. Assault on a female, imagine when a man assaults a woman, it's an A1 misdemeanor. When a woman assaults a man, it's a class 2 misdemeanor. So men are still treated as if they can't be victims of abuse. You notice the difference in the level of abuse. But from a legal standpoint, you take pictures, you do recordings, you keep a journal, because we want evidence. Courts cannot be, doesn't run on moral or emotional. We feel the emotion, we know morally this is wrong, but legally, did they prove their case? And so, have your evidence ready and recognize the signs of abuse, so you are prepared when it starts to come. And when you make that accusation and call 911 and go to court, don't come in later after he called you and said, hey, sweetie, I'm so sorry. Here's 2 dozen roses instead of the one I gave you the last time I punched you in the face. Okay? You need to stick to your guns. All right? We have had a case where he killed her and killed himself in front of her 9-year-old daughter a couple of years ago, right? In Guilford County. I remember that. And if you look back at the record, she had filed charges against this guy at least 9 times. And every time he came to court, she either don't show up or she refused to testify. So you have to be at the point where you will go through with it. And of course, it's easier said than done, because we're not there to protect them 24/7. And if they don't want to go to prison, they don't want to go to jail, so they'll kill somebody in that irrational state of mind. That's all they see is you know, doing this, I'm gonna kill you. Not thinking about the consequences of years in prison. So you have to stick to your accusation, see it through with the state, and take a stand. And I know for us who's not in the situation, it's easier said than done, but you gotta recognize the signs, and that will better prepare you for the end.
And, I was just gonna say, back to the financial piece, like you were saying, you know, if you don't have access, you can still open a bank account by yourself, you know what I'm saying? And like when friends and family and stuff give you money, or even if, let's say you're in a situation where if you do get money, you have to hand it over, right? Because there's people going through those situations. Tell them to go deposit it directly, because anybody can go deposit money into your account, as long as they have the account number and you know the bank. And so they can also go that route as well instead, so that way it doesn't even have to cross your hands, you know, if that's the situation. Have them deposit the money directly and say, hey, this is where you can deposit the money, you know, and depending on your situation, you might be open and honest, like, I'm trying to get out, this is some funds to get out, like, and I've learned that honesty is the best policy, really, because the more you're honest with people, the more credibility you have. And so at the end of the day, like, I'm very open to my situation after I was building the courage, and so if people wanted to help, like my grandparents, for instance, it would go directly to my account. She would just go to the bank and deposit it for me. So.
I want to touch on something. When we talk about taking their weapons, their service weapons, we don't just take their service weapons, we take every weapon they have in their safe. We take the whole, I think we have to take the whole state. We make sure we take all the firearms, long guns, short guns. And not just law enforcement, but that's just in everybody. Sometimes people don't want to tell, they don't want to tell law enforcement. I don't want to tell me at the 9, but I don't want to tell me at the AK 47 or whatever. I don't want to tell you, I don't want to tell them all that. He just has one gun. So tell us to tell them, we take it serious.
Even the legal ones.
The ghost guns. So, the ghost guns, everybody know what ghost guns are?
The only thing I'd like to add is, I don't think any of us actually touched on it, but the cycle of violence. So you start out basically in the honeymoon phase, so everything's great, grand, and wonderful. And then you have the period of like tension building, so nitpicking, they're kind of, you're walking on eggshells, and then you have the explosion. And the whole reason why this is important is because that's sometimes what people get caught up in, is that honeymoon phase. Because after they exploded and we, maybe physically lashed out or whatever their behavior is, they're gonna do the love bombing type situation again. And so it seems like everything's gonna get better. They're gonna promise that it's not gonna happen again. And then you're slowly gonna go back, and everybody has different, each phase is different for everybody. We're all human and we change and whatnot. But it slowly goes back into that tension building phase, and then you have the explosion again. And so sometimes it takes people a few years to realize that this is a cycle, and they can actually almost map it out. I've had people be able to be like, oh, well, it like follows the cycles of the moon, like literally. We're great here, and then as the moon wanes, he starts getting some sort of way, and then when we have a new moon, it's explosions every month. And so just being aware that it is a cycle, and then I always like to remind people to have that hope. Find that something to dream about. I worked with a lady last week who was 72 years old, and her husband started, it sounds like there may be some dementia or early onset, I don't know if that's early onset, I don't know nothing about the aging community, but it might be Alzheimer's as well. And as such, he's become more and more violent over the last few years, until the point where she was getting ready to leave for a trip. He sent her a text and he was like, you show back up, you're dead. Like it was just, it went from 0 to 60 real quick. And she was like, I just don't know what to do. I just never thought this would happen, blah, 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 blah. And in trying to help her figure out where to go from here, I was like, what is your goal for what was your plan for retirement? What do you want to do with the rest of your life? Like, what would you like to do? And she was like, I don't know. I've just always been so stuck in the day-to-day living of my life that I never thought about there being any other possibilities. Never thought about maybe, living in a retirement community and socializing with other folks her age, and so a lot of the people we work with have lost the ability to dream. They've lost the future for themselves. They're so stuck in their present that they can't see beyond it. And so sometimes it's helpful to kindly remind folks, like, there is life after this, if you want it. What do you want it to look like? And that can be the motivator for them if they don't have the financial means or the familial support, or they don't want to go through the law enforcement and legal process because it's going to have, it's embarrassing, I guess, or whatever reason they have. just running with, they could have a life after this. And what do they want it to look like? Because that's the great thing about, for now, here in this country, is we have a lot of freedoms and rights, and so you can make those decisions for yourself. So I always like to just leave people with hope and dreams. Remember that there's more to this than what we're doing right now.
Anything to add? Well, I just want to say thank you all for coming out. I've learned a lot. And I hope that we were able to help someone on the live feed. And
When you feel that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Did y'all discuss the family justice?
We have a red right here.
Oh, you know?
Yeah, yes. That's what's up. No worries, I didn't know where you were either. I was like, oh, that's
what's up. I want to make sure we get all the resources.
And we do have some extra resources up here with like our crisis line and some more information. So if you know, we want to take it and you have somebody you know of or somewhere you can put it, that would be fabulous. You also don't have to, we don't. It's not required.
How often do you have the panels?
This is the first.
this is the first one I've done, so you're thinking we should do it more often? Are you thinking we should do it more often?
Absolutely.
We talked about the root earlier, you know, project management mentality, I always talk about root cause analysis. So knowing that we are groomed in certain ways to think that behaviors are healthy behaviors, from little boys to little girls, and how we receive affection and things like that. So I'm already thinking about like looking at abuse, because it is a very dynamic. You know, what are the thoughts on even, like, we're naming signs of abuse, we're naming the different categories of abuse as adults, that we've had to unlearn, that things that were not love, or things that weren't healthy, you know, or that we thought were healthy or not, and so forth. So how do we be proactive, and what would that look like? This is just a question. How do we be proactive, or what does that look like, that we started the roots teaching adolescent students? Yes, younger, thank you. Actually, you know, in elementary school, like, how do we infuse that into the school system? Just like financial literacy, emotional development and self-emotional regulation, and then also healthy human interaction. How do we infuse that in elementary school so that students know from the beginning, whether mom and dad are practicing or modeling that or not, they know to protect themselves earlier, like, okay, this is not a healthy interaction, and I have the confidence to, in the language, to articulate, identify that, and act accordingly, even as a child. You know, what are the thoughts on that? Is that like just so far beyond, you know, is that out of the question, or is there work being done for that? Okay.
Yes, we are actively working to get more so in the schools, because one of the things that bothers me is nobody talks about consent with kids. We wait until you're an adult. But that consent conversation I started when my child was barely walking. If you don't want to hug that person, it's your body, that's your choice. You have, you know, we ask, can I touch you? Can I hug you? Those types of things. And so absolutely, we have child advocacy centers. And as part of that, those people are expected to go out in schools. And so just yesterday, we were at the experiential school of Greensboro, and they did a body safety and consent presentation. So it's child abuse related, but they also go into, you don't touch somebody without asking first, just like you don't want to be touched. So they are trying to start that younger and younger, at least that's what we're trying to do. I feel like that's more of a systems change requirement, that's that macro level change, because we do live in a society that promotes rape culture, and part of doing that is the misogyny and some of the other things that we are teaching, or are teaching, that are the negative sides of things. That's my opinion. I'm sure y'all have stuff to keep this year.
Thank you for sharing that. One thing you said that's key for me, like you said, it's systematic or systemic, but the consistency of it. Because once a year, like in my daughter's school, she's in a private school at this time, but, you know, I don't take her, I always consider her to have sexual education. Because we're talking, you need to identify the body parts early and know what they are. Because if somebody says, they touched my poo-poo, like really? Like, no, we're not using those words. If she said vagina, I know you did something, because she knows what that part is from the time she was 1 year old, able to utter a word. And the teachers, because it's a religious school, are like, oh my goodness, you know, she said vagina. Yeah, girls have a vagina and boys have a penis. So if you go to your gynecologist and your gynecologist said, we're gonna give you your annual pap smear so I can check your poo-poo, are you gonna take that doctor serious? No. You're not. So like, I mean, I wouldn't want my gynecologist talking to me like that. So why are children forced to speak in that way when we don't talk like that as adults, but also it's a means of protecting and preventing that child, you know, or giving that child the language and confidence to say, yeah, mommy or daddy, they did this, and you can't in court, like, you can't say, oh, that's a code word that we use for her teddy bear, that's what I was touching. I call the teddy bear poo-poo. No, that's not the case. Like, we're consistency.
You said her daddy was eating her cupcake.
Yeah.
So when we got through the law enforcement process, and we got to the courtroom,
People get to.
we couldn't define what a cupcake was for her.
Right.
And so nothing happened. She had to go back to living with daddy because daddy was eating a cupcake, but they thought it was an actual baked good.
And it's the consistency of that education.
He was eating her cupcake, but cupcake for her was a vulva. And so when we went through the process, this was, I'm from the Midwest, but when we went through the process, they couldn't prove what the cupcake was in court because she was born.
Thanks again for coming and sharing, and
Got flyers over there.
we have flyers on the table and there's food in the bag, help yourself, and thanks for coming out.
It's a market, right?
This is like all the emotional class.
That's what I said. I was like, why can't you not?
We get tonight? I don't know how much.